So he wants to make a deal with you that concerns Poland. Wait, didn't he make a deal with Germany just the other year that concerns Poland? Yeah, well, keep an eye on that guy. Okay. May 23rd, 1942. Your ally asks you for assistance, for mighty naval ships to help them in a vital but very dangerous mission. You do this for them, and it is a success. And a few weeks later, you ask them to return the favor. How would you feel if they said no? I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the retreating soldiers of Burma Corps reached India ahead of the Japanese, even as Thai troops invaded Burma from the other end of the country. But while British forces had been unsuccessful there, they were finally finding some success in the skies over Malta. One new offensive began as the Soviets attacked towards Kharkov, preempting a German one in the same region, and in the Crimea, the Germans won the Battle of Kerch, leaving only Sevastopol holding out down there. That preempted German offensive, Operation Friedrichs, was not cancelled, however, and in fact begins this week on the 17th. Of course, the Soviet offensive is still in progress, though on the 17th, the Soviet 28th and 21st Armies are no longer making much headway north of Kharkov against the German 6th Army, and they are stopped the 18th, although the Soviet 6th Army has by that time turned north to try to link up with them. In the southern salient, the Soviet Red Army has routed the Romanians and captured Krasnograd and is making for Poltava. But this has stretched out their armor along a path over 100 kilometers long and is seriously diluting their strength as a fighting force. And even before the surprise German counteroffensive starts, they're having trouble protecting their left flank. This and the heavy buildup of German armor in the region has caused Soviet commander Semyon Timoshenko to lose faith in the attack, and he has his political commissar Nikita Khrushchev ask for permission to halt until he can secure his left flank. Joseph Stalin says no. By the end of the 18th, Ewald von Kleist's counteroffensive with the 1st Panzer Army in the south has been immediately successful in gaining a great deal of ground, with spearhead units reaching the confluence of the Donets and Oskil River. By doing this, they've sabotaged Soviet 9th Army's communications so badly that it's no longer a cohesive fighting force, and certainly cannot any longer be a screen for the 6th Army heading north. Also by this time, the Luftwaffe has destroyed over 150 enemy tanks and hundreds of other vehicles. Then on the 19th, Friedrich Paulus begins his 6th Army counterattack from the north, which is planned to link up with Kleist after surrounding as many Red Army troops as possible. On the 23rd, today, Kleist and Paulus meet up in Balaklaya, southeast of Kharkov, having encircled most of the Soviet 6th and 9th Armies, upwards of 250,000 men, but the fighting is still far from over. But even as a bunch of Soviets are surrounded, a bunch of Germans no longer are. The Germans in the Demyansk pocket have been relieved. Okay, they haven't been under actual siege for a few weeks since a battle group broke free and a supply corridor was established. The smaller pocket at Cholm has also been recently relieved. They all managed to hold out so long in Demyansk by means of an air bridge. Thousands of tons of supplies and 31,000 replacement troops were flown in, and some 36,000 wounded evacuated by over 100 transport planes flying in and out a day. It is a remarkable achievement, to be sure, but as Richard Overy writes in Hitler and Air Strategy, the operation proved to be a Pyrrhic victory. Some 260 valuable transport aircraft and their crews were lost at a time when annual production of transports was running at only 500, and all to save 90,000 German soldiers, 64,000 of whom were either killed, wounded, or too sick for service by the end of the airlift operation. There is fighting this week in that region, though. Adolf Zinsinger's German 83rd Infantry Division attacks some 20 kilometers south of Veliki Luki to clear the road to Neidell. They manage this, but also make the road unusable by destroying bridges and mining it. So the Soviet garrison at Veliki Luki will have to rely solely on the railway for supplies. One allied place that we've seen really struggle to get supplies is Malta. It needs to be supplied to stay alive, and it needs to stay alive to supply and be a base for protecting the supply of the Allied forces in North Africa. And this week, 17 Spitfire planes arrive in Malta. Theater Commander Claude Auchinleck has been ignoring British Prime Minister Winston Churchill's telegrams lately, but finally replies the 19th that he will be ready to attack the Axis positions in North Africa by the time the Harpoon Vigorous convoys sail from Malta. These are two separate supply convoys scheduled to relieve Malta at the same time in mid-June, one from Alexandria, one from Gibraltar. The idea is that if one gets spotted and attacked, and the other one will make it through unharmed. Auchinleck has made some changes to his African forces, reorganizing so that armor, artillery, and infantry will hopefully work much more closely with each other instead of being semi-independent as before. Also, American Grant tanks have begun arriving. They're tough and reliable, and they have a 75mm gun that can fire both high explosive and armor-piercing shells. And except for the German 88s, can pretty much outshoot any tank or anti-tank guns the enemy has in range. So they may come as a nasty surprise for the Axis. The British also have new Crusader tanks with better armor, but they still tend to break down, and they're not as good as the Panzer IIIs that Axis commander Erwin Rommel is starting to get. The British are also bringing in 6-pounder anti-tank guns to replace the 2-pounder ones, though at this point they only have like 100 or so of them. By the end of this week, the forward bases are running at between 2/3 and 4/5 capacity. Tobruk has 10,000 tons of supplies and Bel Ahmed 26,000. And even in spite of Luftwaffe or U-boat attacks, they think they have a pretty solid supply line. They are aware that Rommel is also building up for an advance. On the 16th, at the end of last week, 8th Army Commander Neil Ritchie's orders said that his plan will be to destroy enemy armor in the Tobruk, Gazala, Bir Hakeim triangle, and then overrun Cyrenaica. So his army is now deployed in strongpoints between Gazala and Bir Hakeim, protected by minefields. Each strongpoint, or box, was well wired and dug and contained a week's supply of food and ammunition. But though the intervening spaces were covered by minefields, the boxes were too widely spaced to allow for mutual support, or even for the minefields to be covered by gunfire. In the rear of the main front were other defense positions intended to guard the better tracks and communication centers and to be the bases of maneuver for the Army's mobile forces. This deployment of the 8th Army was the result of a compromise. It was more of a choice than a compromise, I think. A choice between concentration of all forces, which the enemy might not have trouble bypassing should he attack, or an extension of the front to its limit, which would mean he'd really have to sweep around from the south, which would increase his supply and communications issues. Ritchie and Auchinleck have chosen the second course. This arrangement had two great weaknesses and suggests that the British commanders had learned little or nothing. Ritchie had not only put most of his infantry and guns in a fixed line of isolated boxes, which were open to outflanking movements if the minefields could be breached, but he had left a 20-mile gap to be covered by minefields alone, and his armor was spread out over the country in contradiction of the well-established principle of concentration. Auchinleck can see all this, and now on the 20th, he writes to Ritchie saying that if the enemy should attack first, it would likely be a feint in the south to draw off the 30th Corps, and then a breakthrough in the center, followed by a northward push towards Tobruk. So he suggests that 30th Corps be concentrated by the Trig-Capuzzo track west of El Adem to possibly defend against the center or the south, and that armored brigades should fight as armored divisions under Willoughby Norrie's overall control and not be brought to the battle piecemeal. He doesn't insist on this though, so the 7th Armored is deployed a bunch further to the south. Here are some numbers, courtesy of Braddock. The 8th Army right now has 167 Grants, 257 Crusaders, and 149 Stuarts in 30th Corps. The Army Tank Brigades have 276 Matildas and Valentines, and the 1st Armored Brigade has 75 Grants and 70 Stuarts. 190 of the Desert Air Force's 320 planes are operational. Rommel, right now, has 282 Panzer IIIs or 4s and 278 other German and Italian tanks and 77 more in reserve. In the skies, he has 497 planes ready to go, which is a pretty considerable advantage. Why am I telling you all of this right now? Because Erwin Rommel is just about to attack. He has been tasked with taking Tobruk and making it to the Egyptian border, where he will then wait for Malta to fall, after which his supply lines will be safe and he can invade Egypt. He thinks he can pull off stage 1 in 4 days, and his plan is to sneak his entire armor, all of his mobile units, south around Bir Hakeim in the dark and drive north towards Akroma behind 13th Corps. While this is happening, the Italian infantry, a German infantry brigade, and most of his artillery will raise a big stink further to the north to hint that, hey, there's an attack coming there, while he makes ready to hit the 13th from the rear. Once it is destroyed, he'll head for Tobruk while sending the 90th Light Division towards El Adem to attack the British rear and seize their supply dumps. He will move into position the 26th and attack the 27th just a few days from now. It is not just in North Africa, though, where the Allies are wondering where the next attack will come. Last week, I went over the various possibilities American High Command has decided Japan will choose from for their next offensive. American Admirals Ernest King and Chester Nimitz are pretty certain that it will be Midway Island, but this week that becomes clear to everyone. I've talked a bit already about Allied code breaking. By now, intelligence is picking up to 1,000 Japanese radio messages a day, of which they can read maybe a quarter. The pending Japanese operation has an objective that is referred to as AF. Both Joe Rochefort, in charge of the Hawaiian station Hypo, and Edwin Layton, Pacific Fleet Intelligence Chief, thinks AF refers to Midway. To try to find out for sure, on the 22nd, they have Midway installation send out a clear message that they need fresh water because their distillation plant is out of order. Not too long after that, a Japanese intelligence report is intercepted that says AF is short of fresh water. King requests a Royal Navy carrier to beef up defenses in the Pacific, but the British Admiralty refuses, which is interesting since the U.S. Navy had recently sent battleships and a carrier to help out the British in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, but London refuses to return the favor. They had better hope that King does not have a long memory. And in London this week, some important talks are beginning. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov arrives the 20th, and talks with the British government begin the following day about the war and beyond the war. Molotov demands that the USSR get to keep Eastern Poland, the Baltics, and Bessarabia. But Churchill cannot and will not agree to this. On the 23rd, Anthony Eden suggests not trying to work out territory stuff now, and instead making a 20-year alliance. Molotov expresses interest, and talks will continue. But this week of the war will not. A week of German gains, possible huge German gains, in Ukraine as the Soviet offensive there ends, and Axis plans to attack in both North Africa and the Pacific, with one set of those to be attacked still in the dark, and the others now aware of the target. The British, it seems, have ways of really pissing off their allies so far in 1942. Some perhaps justifiable, others maybe less so. I mean, they refused Chiang Kai-shek's offer of his best-trained forces to help defend Burma, which was a pretty big snub. And then when things went bad in Burma, they tried to make the Australian forces come in and defend Burma at just the moment when it looked like the Japanese were going to invade Australia. And now, just weeks after the Americans sent a carrier to the Mediterranean to run the dangerous Axis air power gauntlet and deliver planes to British Malta, they say, sorry, can't help, when the biggest naval force on Earth is about to head over and invade American territory and destroy what's left of its Pacific fleet. Okay, the reason given is that they're worried about a Japanese attack on Madagascar. And that's not a bad reason. Don't get me wrong. The Japanese taking Madagascar would be a big deal. But the Japanese invading Hawaii and destroying America's fleet seems to be a bigger deal at just this moment. And returning the favor, the recent favor, wouldn't be a bad thing for an ally to do. But, what's done is done. And as I said, let's hope for Britain's sake that King has a short memory. If you too have a short memory and you forget what your favorite Time Ghost stars look like between episodes, then you are in luck. Now you can go to the Time Ghost barracks and check out all of our awesome new Time Ghost collectibles. It's like Cabbage Patch Kids, only totally different in every single way. Things like this. Look, me on a mug. Woo! And if you want to see a deal that Molotov made just a few years ago, you can check out this Between Two Wars Season 1 episode about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact right here. And I ain't done yet, right? Our Time Ghost Army member of the week is Julian Steff. The Time Ghost Army provides the financing that has made all of this possible. So join the army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. And do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.